So in this lecture we will review the basics of digital communication. This is a part of unit 1, and we will discuss the portion till line coding. Just we will do a quick review. Some portion has already been discussed through imparters. So what is digital communication? So if you ask, modulation is divided into two parts. One is analog modulation and one is analog modulation, other is digital modulation. So the difference between analog and digital communication is that we are using digital modulation techniques, and the data which is available at the input is digital in nature. So if you see this diagram, that is a block diagram of digital communication. It has elements of digital communication. So we have a source encoder, that is analog signal which is present in the nature is converted into digital data, which is 10010 like this. This data need to be converted into electrical representation, that is done through line coding. That is the second block. Then after we need to pass it through a channel. Channel can be wired or wireless. If it is a wired, then this signal can be transmitted. If it is wireless, we need to have antenna, and for this we need to carry out something which is called as a modulation. So in analog communication we have analog modulation techniques, while in digital communication we have digital carrier modulation. Example is your ASK, FSK, PSK, QPSK, QM, etc. Now the channel is available to utilize the proper bandwidth of the channel. The signal from different sources, S2, S3, S4 and so on, these are multiplexed using frequency division multiplexing or time division multiplexing and pass through channel. Then after channel we have a regenerative repeater, and regenerative repeater is basically it will take the pulses and regenerate them after comparing with the threshold, that is your lambda, and these are repeated after certain intervals, and finally we have a receiver at the user end. So as explained, these are the elements of digital communication system: source encoder, line coding, digital carrier modulation, multiplexing, channel. Regenerative repeater, receiver and so on. Now let us come to line coding scheme. It is an important part of digital modulation technique because the signal, the bits which are to be converted into electrical form must have certain properties. So what is line coding? Line coding is a process by which the bits are converted into appropriate electrical representation. Here it is important to mention appropriate electrical representation. Either suitable or appropriate is an important thing. So why it should be suitable or electrical? Because there are certain properties which a line code must follow. What are those properties? Let us see that. The first is your transmission bandwidth. So a line code must have minimum bandwidth, as less bandwidth as possible, as it is shown. For a given transmission power and detection error rate, it should be as small as possible. Second is power efficiency. It must have good power efficiency, or less power should be available. It must transmit less power for given bandwidth and error rate. Third is a line code must have error detection and correction capability. If I have two line codes, then I will pay for a code which have error detection and correction capability. AMI is one such code. Then the fourth important property of a line code is it must have favorable PSD. The meaning of favorable PSD is it must have zero DC component. It must have zero DC component. So what is the meaning of zero DC component? Why it is important? Because we are using a AC coupling. So if DC is there between two regenerative repeaters, then this is going to be neglected and it may introduce error in transmission. And second, so first part is it must have zero DC component. The second part of this is it must have low power at low frequency. If low power or low AC power at low frequency. So these two component mixes together and makes the PSD as a favorable PSD. These are important part. And the fifth important property of a line code is that it must have adequate timing content, because in digital communication, one of the difference between analog and digital communication is that in digital communication we must have clock both at the transmitter and receiver, and these two clock must be in synchronous state, must be synchronized. So there are various methods of synchronization, but the important method is that we must be able to detect the clock from the received signal itself. That is called as a self-extraction. So line code must be such that we should be able to detect the timing content or clock from the data itself, and for this it is important to have the enough number of transitions in the given line code. And the next important property is the synchronization. Synchronization is transparency. Transparency means the clock extraction must be possible for all the sequences. That is, it must be independent of the sequence. That is, if my sequence is 1 1 1, then also it must be I must be able to get the clock content. And in case my sequence is all zeros, say like this, then after I should be able to recover the clock content. That is why if I am able to recover the clock irrespective of the sequence, then that is called as a transparent code. So these are the 6 important properties that a line code must have.